I love your channel. I've been watching for quite a while now. Well, thank you, Ashley. It's very nice of you. I'm a recent graduate and would love for you to take a look at my work. And we have Piper. Piper here, I believe is her name. All right. Well, Ashley, let's take a look. You don't have any reference? I don't know if this character is from something. She kind of looks like a character from Black Panther. I don't know if anybody knows who or what this is from. So I don't have a reference, so I think we're just going to kind of do a general critique. This looks like it's kind of in that finished stage, the last, what I call the last 10% or so. So I think what I'll be doing is a lot of general kind of stuff that I would change. CFDJ, thank you for the follow there. So we'll talk about some more general stuff, and then I don't know if this is like what this is for, if this is for real time or if this is just a sculpt. Looking at the face topology that you have on here, I would assume that this is just a sculpt right now and you are maybe going to take this to retopo it later. I'll critique it more based on form and maybe some texture work as well. So where do we want to start? I think the first thing that caught my eye was some of the stuff going on down here in the feet. So let's turn off our poly paint really quick, and I'm gonna swap my material. We can go ahead and go down there. CFDJ, good morning to you as well, man. Welcome, welcome, welcome. She looks like one of the Dora Milaje. I'm not sure what that is. But yes. I do appreciate if you have a reference that you're working from or main reference that you can send in. I always like that stuff. I guess just like a little thing, make sure you know you're not getting your geometry interpolating. That's a really small thing. I just saw that for the first time. I looked at this very briefly earlier. But let's see, let's get into these legs. So you have a lot of complex form going on down here. And I think that your hard surface geometry just starts to get a little messy. I'm not sure, here, let's turn on double really quick. I'm not sure what is intentional down here and what is not. I'm not like, for instance, this kind of push in there, I'm not sure if that was intentional to kind of fit the shape of the calf. If that is the case, I would maybe try to get a little bit more aligned with kind of like the organic curve of the shape of this. So no matter how complex a form starts to get, right? So we think in stages of primary, secondary, tertiary. As we go up that chain, we still want the primary to read really well. And what I'm seeing here is that we have, we have pretty much just two straight parallel lines coming down this leg. There is a little bit of taper going on here, which I love to see. I love to see taper. But there's really not a lot. So I think you could push some of the shapes found in the calf or the gastrocnemius a little bit more. So maybe play with that. Again, I'm not sure if this was intentional or if that was just maybe some accidental hit with the move brush and it just went unnoticed. But yeah, play around with that. Try to get some more of that interesting form that you see in the leg at that most basic lower level. Other than that, in terms of the hard surface modeling, I think some of the forms are just a little bit dirtier than I would like to see. Some of this stuff feels like it's kind of going between intentional and unintentional. If I see a shape, I want to make sure that it feels intentional. So if I see something, I'm like, that kind of looks, you know, not really the quality that I'm seeing in the rest of this. Make sure that that's something that you kind of try to focus on. But other than that, I think there's some really good stuff going on down here. I would just maybe clean up the geometry a little bit as it starts to get a little messy through a lot of this for a hard surface piece. And another thing that I'm just now seeing back here, if you're going to be having, I don't know exactly what this piece is or what the functionality of this is, but you might want to think about your edge quality here comparing to some of the rest of the stuff that you're doing back here. A little bit more messy, you got some softer edges, maybe you want to make that more consistent throughout. Let's see. what do we got here? For reference, what did we find? Yes, I don't know if this is the warrior from Black Panther. That's what I said it looked like. How does one alt tab? Whoops, let's see. Yeah, I think it's similar. I don't think that was, maybe some inspiration was taken from here, but I don't think that's explicitly what it's supposed to be. All right, let's move along here. Take a look around a little bit more. So those are pretty much all my notes on the hard surface stuff. I would say that it's pretty much the same through the rest of this. I know you have some more organic stuff going on in the hand, but anywhere where you do have hard surface stuff, just make sure that it is of the same quality of the stuff that you have down in the leg. So for some of this stuff, it might be easier if some of these were separate meshes. Like one thing that you could do, you don't have to necessarily make it a separate mesh, but if this was separate, you could just project the form directly onto the glove and then go from there so that you could hard poly model some of this stuff so it didn't feel like it all was, you know, different from one another. So that every single one of these shapes feels exactly the same scale, all that stuff. These are pretty small details though, so, you know, take that with a grain of salt. In terms of overall form here, actually, let's talk about this first. Let's talk about since we just did hard surface, let's talk about your more organic stuff, specifically your folds. So it looks like, from what I can tell, and maybe if you are here or watching this later, maybe you can correct me, but this looks like it's simulated. From what I can tell, this looks like some marvelous fold simulation. If not, congrats, you did a very good job on the folds in terms of like the larger shapes. The reason I assume this is simulated is because typically people have a lot of trouble sculpting very large, complex folds, and this has a lot of large, complex folds that make me assume that this is simulated. But if not, good job on that. I would say just make sure that in some of these places where it does look like you kind of went through and tried to hand sculpt some of the folds on top of that, a little recommendation for you. Use something like the damn standard brush and lazy mouse, and maybe turn like a softer alpha on. That's kind of what this brush is. And what I recommend doing is coming through, and especially with that lazy mouse, maybe use like a really large brush size, a really large stroke. Start blocking out that major form. And then what I want you to do, look at the folds here as they come down. Definitely looks like you kind of hit this a little bit with a standard brush or some brush that had the dot stroke turned on. So if I can show this, I don't know if I'll be able to. Nah, let's see. Let's use the default clay tubes brush. So with some of the default brushes in ZBrush, they'll have either the dot stroke turned on, or they just have a quality about them that makes them, as you stroke a little bit faster, they start to get, you know, a little bit of spacing between each sample. And that is the sample of your brush. There's a way to turn that up, but with my brushes, what I've done, I believe I have adjusted that, but I also use lazy mouse to some extent to get a little bit of a cleaner stroke no matter how fast I go through there. But what I wanted to point out to you, other than that just looking a little bit rough there, very small, hard to catch, I didn't even notice it till I zoomed in, but looking at this large fold, so we come around here, right, we're looking really good, and then we flow into the main shape there, and it fades out into this kind of, you know, the base there. So this is a little principle called edge quality, and it's something that I think we're kind of missing through some of these folds up here. So essentially, after you get that main shape, you're starting to block that in. What I want you to do is come through and on the ends of that fold, try to blend it a little bit more back into the base of the fabric. So you have some parts where it's, you know, really strong, and other parts where it's a little bit more you know, fading back out to the rest of the shape. And you'll probably have to play with this a lot longer than what I did here. This was just, you know, 3 or 4 strokes, but start playing with that. Think about edge quality. Don't let the fold be the same consistency throughout the entire length of it. And I really do think that'll help you get your folds up to the next level, kind of looking a bit more of the quality of the larger folds that you have down here. So play with that. Again, just make sure, you know, you're not getting any weird interpolation geometry blended into each other. And then I think you have pretty much the same kind of issues going on down here, other than the geometry just being really messy. Try to focus on the exact same thing. Oh boy. It looks like you had 2 pieces of geometry on top of each other that you dynameshed. Always gives some really stupid and awkward polygroups like that. Oh, you do have some more subdivs in here. Okay, cool. So yes, definitely a little bit, get that more resolution in there, but pay attention to the same things that we just looked at up in our sleeves. Damn Standard has that when it is big, the dot equality. Yeah, Damn Standard, Standard Brush, a lot of that stuff. Tuanor, what's going on? Welcome back. In terms of general form, I would say, looking at this silhouette, I think that, I pretty much always say, if you're gonna have a lot of junk in your trunk, you need to have legs that support it. In this instance, I think you do have that, but I would try to maybe get a little bit more in between, between your butt and your leg. Another thing, so what I mean by that very quickly is that, you know, maybe pull in your butt a little bit more, but then pull out that lower portion of the leg so we can start supporting this form a little bit better. So maybe look at that a little bit. But also, just looking at the overall shape of your leg, they get pretty large in the back at the top portion, and then they taper really quickly. So pay attention to the overall form here. You might want to make that a little bit more consistent throughout, or just kind of knock that back in the upper area a little bit. Because right now it just feels like it's almost awkwardly inflated around here. A lot of the extra volume, so if you're looking at that inner shape of the leg, if you're just looking at the silhouette, you have the kind of basic silhouette correct, but this volume on the inside of the leg is created by what are called your abductor muscles, and they kind of flow right down through here in this general shape. And that's what creates that silhouette of your inner leg. There are adductors and abductors, but I guess these are specifically your hips. I think that's on the back, if I can find a good reference here. It is adductors. So that's what that volume is, and you can kind of see the line of this muscle. It's not your, it's been a while. SCL? I can't remember, but pay attention to that shape. That's not so much in the back. So look for this shape, kind of follow the line. Let's see here, let's get a pinch real quick. Kind of follow that line through here. If you want to take this, you know, a really far step back, I'm just kind of being messy a little bit. But look for that volume in the front, but towards the back, that shape doesn't really exist quite to that extent. So I don't think you're gonna have quite as much curve here from the back, and mainly just that larger shape of the hamstrings will be defining that. So that's what's causing that, I think, to feel very awkwardly inflated through here. So take a second look at that, and I think get that in a really good place. I don't think they look bad. I just think from the profile and from the 3/4 in the back, it starts to feel a little bit awkwardly inflated. Again, those were the adductors in the front, not the abductors, as I originally said, I believe. So take a look at that, and let's see. I think the overall silhouette of this character is nice. I think you got some good shape here. I like the proportions of this. I think we've said pretty much all I want about hard surface and folds. I'm just making sure there's nothing else here before we jump on up to the face. These are pretty cool. I like this. It's very fun. I'm not sure what they are, but I like it. I'm not sure if it's just like for aesthetic reasons. Might want to make sure, again, just another area for collisions and such, that you're avoiding any of that. But other than that, very cool idea. Let's see. I think that's about it on the body. So let's take a look at our face. She did not skip leg day. No, definitely not. All right, just feeling a little, nah, I guess not. So first, I was looking at this with the poly paint on. I'm not sure if this is a texture. No, I think this is just poly paint. It is, yes. Okay, so looking at this with the poly paint, I really like what you've done here. I'm not sure what material you are using. I think you had some default blend loaded in before, and I'm not sure if that's what this is. But it causes these like rainbow highlights that I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not sure if you're gonna be like rendering this in ZBrush or anything, but for like preview purposes, I think it's totally fine. So I think the poly paint work that you've done on the skin is very nice. It looks very good. When we come into some certain areas though, it starts to kind of dip in quality a little bit. So for instance, I'm not sure if this is like a placeholder or what, but these kind of painted on eyebrows feel a little awkward and out of place. I would also say that the poly paint on the lips feels a little bit muddy and almost bruised in nature. Kind of same thing up in the ears. You got these really like deep, dark, kind of painted shadow areas. And I think it's okay to paint shadows, but it starts to get a little out of hand here. So that's maybe something that you would like to take a second pass at. In terms of like weight and gravity here, I noticed this as well in your ears. I think it's smart if you're gonna be using this for something else, but like if you're gonna be retopping this and taking this into a real-time application, keep everything as neutral as you can and as far apart kind of as you can. Think like neutral pose or T-pose, A-pose, whatever you want. But for something like this, you know, once you do get into posing, depending on where you're going with this, think more about weight and gravity here. I know this is kind of interpolating into the neck piece that you have here, which is fine just as it is, but once you do get into that posing stage, think a little bit more about gravity here because it feels like the ears are kind of just like floating off to the side, so make sure you take that into consideration. I think there are just a few other areas as well where some of your geometry doesn't feel like it's super integrated well with the other parts. Some of that stuff where it was kind of bleeding through other geometry, but also like here on the chin, I think this is supposed to be a piercing based on that geometry on the other side. But maybe think about how the lip would compress against that on the upper part, or maybe against the bottom part of the skin on the chin. Because if it is a piercing, right, it's probably going to be, you know, maybe a little bit more taut against the skin. So think about that in some other areas, kind of like what you did down here. I think this is a nicer integration of some additional geometry. Aside from poly paint, so if we turn that off, I think there's some really good form going on here. Some really nice stuff. I think your ears do get a little bit dirty in terms of just like general shape. So I would recommend before, you know, adding the texture on here, just take a step back and clean some of this up. I mean, even just like a really quick smooth pass like that cleaned up most of that. So take that, you know, just back one stage and then maybe come back through and do another quick little texture pass on top of that. You have some, like I said, some really good stuff going on in the face. I think you get a little duck lippy here and you could maybe take a little bit of that off, kind of push that in a little bit more. And then for the overall shape of the head, you have some really nice taper going back here, which I always like. I always look for that. The top of the head, right along this ridge, it feels a little bit like there's just way too much of a hit here. I'm gonna nitpick you on some of this stuff, so I would maybe just play with the overall shape of your head just from that front view a little bit. Just maybe look at your reference a little bit more. Try to make sure it's not getting, you know, this super strong kind of flow back from here. There is that, there is the ridge of the skull that kind of flows back from that brow all the way back there, but with muscle and fat and skin and everything else on top of that, it's not quite such a distinct shape. And maybe in your head it is. But again, we do not have a reference. The shape of your brow in the middle of the forehead, it feels a little bit like we have this kind of plane running through here if we just look at where that major hit is. So I would say maybe play with the shape of your brow in the middle of your face a little bit. And just try to get a little bit more of that kind of S curve or M, whatever you want to call it. And then maybe, you know, blend through there a little bit. Just so it doesn't feel quite so like this single ridge going, like the single crescent C curve going across the brow. I think that starts to feel a little bit too awkward. So if we undo back to that right here. So I take a look at that. Again, the mouth from the profile, I think this is really nice coming down through the jaw into the neck. I think you've done a good job blending a lot of this. It looks really nice from the back as well, just looking at the silhouette. Other than that, I think you've done a very nice job on this overall. And like I said, I think you're kind of in the final stages, that last like little 10%. There's a lot of different kind of variations on skull shapes, but it does feel a little large in the back. And again, you know, that might be your reference, but maybe that's something else that you can look at. Other than that, again, great job on this. There is some really good stuff on here. I tried to nitpick you a little bit, and hopefully for the better. Let's make sure we don't have any other questions, and I think we can move on to the next one. I only have one more in the queue though, so if we don't get any more, that will be the end of our critiques for today. If you guys do want to get in for the critique, to hop in the queue, type in !critique in chat for the instructions, and you can send your Z-tools to me at follygon@gmail.com. Last note, I did notice, Ashley, that you sent me a ZBrush project file, and you have a bunch of other objects in this. So it might be a little bit easier for you. I don't know why you saved a ZBrush project. You might have a particular reason. I see that you have some other, you know, versions of your head, just kind of like progress on this, I'm guessing, over time. Yes, I can see you removing your ear hole there, all that good stuff. So if you want to continue saving your ZBrush project, I would click up here and just make sure that you come through some of these older heads. You might want to delete some of those and instead save your file as a Z tool, which you can do up here under Tool, Save As, and it'll typically cut your ZBrush file size like down to 1/10 of the original. Once you start getting up in these higher poly counts, especially when you have these like additional tools, additional objects in here, I think it'll cut your file size down quite a bit. So maybe check that out if that's not something that you have done before. Again though, I don't know why you're saving a ZBrush project. You might have a specific reason.